A very popular financial strategy on YouTube is the concept of paying off a credit card with zero cash flow. But does this strategy really work? Well, in today's video, I'm going to go over why I personally believe the strategy is not everything it is made out to be, and a major risk that is often overlooked with the strategy. We'll also go over some alternative strategies that individuals can use to pay down their credit card debt if they don't have any extra cash flow. To better understand how the strategy works, let's take a look at an example. Imagine Phil currently has a monthly income of $4,000 and $4,000 in expenses. This leaves his monthly cash flow at $0. Phil is looking to pay off his credit card, which currently has a balance of $7,000 at 21% interest and a minimum monthly payment of $175. According to the strategy, the next thing for Phil to do to pay off his balance while having $0 in monthly cash flow is to transfer his monthly income onto his credit card. Phil will then pay his monthly expenses through his credit card. However, for Phil, only $2,500 of his monthly expenses are eligible to be paid onto his credit card. So in Phil's case, he will put that $2,500 onto his credit card and leave $1,500 in his checking account to cover his expenses such as his rent that cannot be paid with his credit card. Let's see where this leaves Phil now. By transferring the $2,500 onto his card, he has now lowered his balance on his credit card to $4,500. But of course, Phil will still need to pay his $2,500 in expenses throughout the month onto his credit card. However, since Phil has now satisfied the minimum payment of $175, this is an expense he will no longer have to worry about. This then leaves Phil with $2,325 in expenses to be paid onto his credit card. As these different expenses come due throughout the month, Phil will pay them through his credit card. At the end of the month, Phil will be left with a balance of $6,825 on his credit card. Now, let's pause here and compare the scenario to if Phil just made the minimum payment onto his credit card each month and didn't pay his expenses onto this card. In this case, Phil's minimum payment of $175 will bring his balance down to $6,825. So if we end up with the same balance, what is the difference between these two strategies? Well, the truth is there's only going to be a very minor difference in terms of the interest rate charges. Credit card interest is calculated using the average daily balance. And in our first example, where Phil pays his expenses on his credit card, he is able to lower his average daily balance as all of his expenses will not be paid at the same time. To keep things simple, let's say that all of Phil's $2,500 in expenses come out equally throughout the month. This would leave his average daily balance right around $5,663. His monthly interest charge at his rate of 21% will then be around $99. On the other hand, if Phil just made his minimum payment, his average daily balance would be $6,825 and his monthly interest charge on his balance would be about $119, which is $20 higher than our other scenario. Also, since Phil's average daily balance is lower in our first example, this can help him increase his credit score as credit utilization is a factor included in the calculation of one's credit score. So if Phil used our first strategy in the first month, he would come out ahead by about $20 and likely make a slight increase to his credit score. So why do I think this strategy is not everything that it's made out to be? Well, there are two main reasons, and that is that one, there's substantial risk here that is typically overlooked, and two, there are other alternatives out there that I believe are more suitable for many people. Let's start with the risk. By paying all of his income onto his credit card, Phil is lowering his balance by $2,500 immediately. As mentioned, this is what helps lower his average daily balance, but it also opens up additional room on his credit card. And when it comes to credit card debt, many individuals are not in debt because they can't understand the mathematics behind paying down their debt, but rather they have an inability to control their spending. And if someone has shown time and time again that they're not able to control their spending, there's a high likelihood that creating additional room on their credit card will lead them to making additional purchases that are not related to their expenses. That is why I truly believe that for the majority of individuals, the risk of making additional purchases and making a debt situation worse greatly outweighs the small savings that can be seen with the interest rates. So what are some alternatives to this strategy of paying off a credit card with zero cash flow? Well, one alternative is taking advantage of a transfer balance offer to a credit card that offers 0% APR for a set period of time. This will allow you to pay no interest for a set period of time that is typically between 12 to 18 months. Of course, you will still need to pay a transfer fee of around 3 to 5%, but the strategy can still be advantageous if the 0% interest period is optimized to its fullest. However, one challenge with this approach is that it can be very difficult to get approved for one of these 0% offers with a bad credit score. So in that case, it might make sense to use the strategy of paying all of your expenses to your credit card, which as mentioned earlier can help with improving one's credit score. And after say 3 to 5 months, then try applying for a 0% offer with an improved credit score. But again, this approach still opens up the risk of making additional purchases on your card, potentially leaving you in a worse place compared to where you started. So if that risk seems too great, another alternative is to look for ways to 1, reduce your monthly expenses, or 2, increase your monthly income. I know this alternative may not seem nearly as exciting as other alternatives, but the truth is, even if one gets out of debt with $0 in cash flow, it will be very difficult to stay out of debt. Emergency expenses frequently come up, and if you don't have additional cash flow on a monthly basis, you will likely be going into more debt to cover these emergency expenses. With that being said, I do recognize that creating additional income or reducing expenses is not an easy thing for many people to do. That is all for today. If you found this content to be helpful and insightful, it would be greatly appreciated if you could like this video and consider subscribing to the channel for more content related to velocity banking and everyday finance.